Welcome to the Calling the Quarters podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. This is Season 2, Episode 1. Today, I am talking to Linda Raedisch. She is the author of 4 books, including The Lore of Elfland, Secrets from the Bronze Age to Middle-earth. She is also the author of a new book, The Secret History of Christmas Baking, Recipes and Stories from Tomb Offerings to Gingerbread Boys. Linda is a paper crafter, soap maker, and eclectic writer who loves to explore museums, grave mounds, and old coal sightings. She lives in northern New Jersey. I had a great time talking to Linda. I'm going to take you now to my conversation with her. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. Today, I'm talking with Linda Raedisch. She's the author of the upcoming book, History of Christmas Baking, Recipes and Stories from Tomb Offerings to Gingerbread Boys. This is coming out in September, and it's available on Amazon for pre-order, and it'll be available in all better bookstores. Linda, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, happy to be here.
Now, for our listeners who are not familiar with your work, can you talk about yourself a little bit and tell us where you're from, where you live now, and what you do?
I'm from New Jersey, and I currently live about 5 miles and just over the Watchung Mountains from where I grew up. I'm on the Passaic River, if there's anybody from New Jersey listening.
I think there are, yeah.
Northern New Jersey. Yeah, no, most of northern New Jersey is on the Passaic River. In fact, everywhere you turn here, you're on the Passaic River. So let's see, I do not have a degree. I refer to myself as a rabid autodidact. I have a high school diploma and some college. I think I learned, half of what I know I learned in school, half I learned just from reading the encyclopedia back in the days before the internet. I've always been interested in a lot of different things, arts and crafts, language is big with me, ancient stuff, and basically like everything that like you don't learn about in school. It was, if there was something, well, we're going to learn about this, and this is also interesting, but we're really going to learn about this. I want the thing that's off to the side, the obscure, and you can't really get a college degree in the obscure. And so, but writing for Llewellyn has been great because I've written a lot of articles for their almanacs over the years. And, I decided, well, what am I interested in? I'll write an article about that. And then I do the research and I find out about it.
I want to jump in on that. Now, you've done a lot of writing, and you've written for many publications through Llewellyn. And you've written several books that we'll go into. What time in your life did writing kind of come up as something that you knew that you'd be doing long term?
I remember I was 7 and I wrote my first picture book on a paper bag, and I cut it up to make it into a book. I've always loved books. Maurice Sendak told a story about how he got a book for Christmas. I can't remember what book it was, and he just he tried to take a bite out of it as a little kid because he just loved it so much. That's my relationship with books. I loved, especially library books. I was fascinated by the Mylar covers. When I was both my parents always worked, so my first trip to the library were with our neighbors, and I didn't have a library card, so I couldn't check out any books. So I just sat on the floor and I would read the books there. So, holding these books, looking at the pictures, and not being able to take them home with me, I think made them more precious. And when I got to high school, and my sister was really the one who got us going to the library seriously, I just, I couldn't get enough of it. My first job was at a library, worked in, I think, 4 different libraries. So always books, books, books. But when you tell your high school guidance counselor you like writing, they say, oh, so you can be a journalist. And at that time, that was in the 80s, graduated in 1986, and I'm thinking, journalist, that means I have to go to Beirut. I don't want to go to Beirut. So nobody ever said, I didn't know there was such a thing as like a Master of Fine Arts in writing. Nobody said, well, you could write books, which it is hard to make a living writing books. I did try, creative writing in college. We were reading very, we were reading Thomas Pynchon, I think. Crying of Lot 49 and obscure kind of stuff. And yeah, so that didn't work for me. And then you probably have heard of Wendy Mass. Her most famous book is probably Still a Mango-Shaped Space. She's a middle grade author.
Mm-hmm.
And she's written over 20 books now, I think. But I met her in an adult school writing class when she was working on Mango-Shaped Space. We kept in touch, and she got to a point where her fiction writing career was going well, but she still had a contract outstanding for a school library book about Halloween for 5th and 6th graders. So
Ooh.
she had me, yeah, and I needed, I was strapped for cash. So she paid me to ghostwrite that book, ghostwrite most of it. I think she wrote one chapter.
Yeah.
And so I was writing this book about Halloween for elementary school, middle schoolers. And it was fun. I enjoyed doing the research. It was a challenge because like how they wanted me to cover the Greenwich Village Halloween parade. How do you cover the Greenwich Village Halloween parade for 5th and 6th graders? It was a little tough. And I thought it would be fun to write a book like this about Walpurgis Night, but for adults.
Yeah.
You know, it's Walpurgis like the European flip side of Halloween in April for adults. And one of the books that Wendy had given me a whole box of books that she had already bought for research. And one of them was Celebrate Halloween by, I always forget if she's Silver Ravenwolf or Raven Silverwolf. It was a Llewellyn
Silver
book.
Ravenwolf. Yeah. Yeah.
Silver Ravenwolf. And I thought I could write a book like this about Walpurgis Night. And so I think I queried one other publisher who said, great idea, but too obscure. And then I queried Llewellyn, and they said, yeah, let's take a chance on an unpublished author. And that book became Night of the Witches.
Were there any books when you were young that really influenced you? I asked that question because I really see recurring in your writing a real love of mythology and folkways and magic. Was there anything that really inspired you when you were young that kind of caught your attention and kind of set the path for you?
Yeah, The Hobbit was big. I was a poor reader, so it took me about 30 years to finish The Hobbit.
I think you're there with most people, yeah.
Just because I was the kind of kid, I still do this. I'll start 5 books, but I'll only finish 1.
Yeah.
And so we had The Hobbit. We went to Germany on vacation to visit relatives in probably 1978, and we had the mass market paperback of The Hobbit. And this was shortly after the Rankin-Bass animated Hobbit had been on TV.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'd seen that. I loved that. I was trying to read this book. I would have been 10. My sister had read it, so I was asking her questions about it. She was a book finisher, and she was, kind of explaining. I remember asking her things like, well, how big is a hobbit? Why are there no dwarf women? How can we have more dwarves if there's only dwarf men? And the fun part of it was reading it in Germany. We were in northern Germany, and my grandmother, she liked bus trips, so she would drag us around on bus trips. And part of the bus trip, we were in Bad Bevensen in the Lüneburger Heide in northwestern Germany, and there was right by what you would now call an Airbnb, was there was this really dark forest of conifers that we hiked through. And I remember hiking through it and saying to my sister, does this remind you of anything? And she says, this is like Mirkwood. I'm like, yeah, it's like Mirkwood. So The Hobbit, just reading The Hobbit in that setting, or beginning to read The Hobbit in that setting. I finally finished when my son was born, and I read it aloud to him. That was the first time that I finished it all the way, even though I have read the entire Rings trilogy. So The Hobbit was instrumental. There was also a book of Norse mythology that my grandmother had in Germany, because we would go visit her about every other summer. And we would bring books with us from home, and then we always stayed for a month. So eventually we would finish the books. And I didn't speak much German at the time. I certainly couldn't read it. So then she had 2 English language books at home. One was like little mystery stories that were meant for English learners, and they had the vocabulary on the bottom. And one was Norse mythology. I think it had only like 3 myths in them, mostly about Thor. And so I would end up reading that every summer just because there was nothing left to read. So I got comfortable. Norse mythology always seemed like something friendly, something familiar.
In 2011, you wrote Night of the Witches, Folklore Traditions and Recipes for Celebrating Walpurgis Night. That's something that, we've heard so much about it in so many books, so many works of fiction reference it. And, many metaphysical books talk about it as well. So what kind of captivated you to write about Walpurgis Night? What kind of, I know we talked about this already and how you kind of got to write it, but what kind of captivated your interest about Walpurgis Night, and how did you get to write this book?
That was another library moment for me. I was a shelver at the library in Madison, New Jersey, in the children's room. And like any good shelver, of course, I have to look at the books, thumb through the most interesting books before I put them on the shelf. And I can't remember what book it was, but there was a picture of kids dressed as witches celebrating Walpurgis Night. And I saw that it was a European thing. It was in the springtime, kids dressed as witches, just like at Halloween. And I just kind of filed away as, well, that's cool. And didn't really think about it again until I was working on Celebrate Halloween for Wendy Mass. And it just kind of clicked, hey. And I kind of looked around, and I could not find another English language book, a whole book on Walpurgis Night. So I thought, hey, this is my niche, and I went for it.
In 2013, you wrote your first book dealing with the topic of Christmas, and this was The Old Magic of Christmas, Yuletide Traditions for the Darkest Days of the Year. This is your first book about this magical holiday season. Have you always been a fan of this holiday?
Yeah, I've always liked Christmas Eve best. I've always liked Advent best, which in our house, because we're German, you celebrate Advent at home, and you light 1 candle on each of the 4 Sundays leading up to Advent. If Christmas Eve is on a Sunday, that's 4th Advent. Otherwise, it's the 4 Sundays before. You light 1 more candle each Sunday. So on the 4th, you have 4 candles, and you eat cookies. In the afternoon, you wait till it gets dark, you light the candles, you make tea or coffee, cocoa, and you eat cookies. And so that was something special that pretty much only our family did. Nobody else I knew did that at home in New Jersey. So it was something unique, and it's the no pressure thing. Usually early in the season, we would eat store-bought balls and cookies because my mom, she would start baking the Saturday after Thanksgiving, but then those cookies were sealed in a tin because they were not ready yet. Like the flavors have to coalesce. So she would have made the Stollen, the Anistrops, maybe the Lebkuchen, and we would have maybe end pieces or duds with Advent coffee. And then as you get closer, then she would start to bring out, and you have more homemade things on the plate. And so that was a special thing. And I think I do it with my kids. And it's I guess it's what nowadays they would call hygge. There's this movement for all the Scandinavian cozy things that people are learning about. And that's one of them.
Nice. I like that a lot. We did something like that when my son was small, kind of building up to the solstice, which I've always liked. And
it's definitely kind of solstice related, because it's getting more and more light as you add more candles.
Are there any traditions in the book that you've particularly captivated with?
Oh, in Old Magic Christmas?
Yeah.
Okay, that was, as you said, that came out in 2013.
Quite a while ago.
So I'm thinking back. I mean, I really loved all the cross-dressing.
Yeah.
And I think that has gotten me some LGBTQ following, which I didn't anticipate. But when, people were starting to follow me on Facebook, and I'm like, why are so many of my followers gay? And then they're like, oh, because there's so much about Christmas that's gender bending.
Yeah.
I included a story in there. I love the St. Lucia, and that's not anything I take part of. I just like the image. The girl who dresses in looks like a white nightgown. She has the crown of candles on her head, and she delivers buns on the morning of December 13th, which is the old style winter solstice.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was at one point when they kept playing around with the calendars. At one point, December 13th was when the winter solstice fell. And so I included a story about there was a boy in Sweden, and he wanted to be the Lucia, and his classmates voted him the Lucia, and he looked beautiful, long red curly hair. And I think there was some pushback from the school, but he finally got to play the Lucia in the Lucia pageant. Yeah, and he looked great. And I said before the Lucia, there were the Star Boys, and the Star Boys, they performed sort of the same function. And before that, they would put the candles on a cow. So it's really, it's not an exclusively female thing. And then you have the whole, there were often a boy would play the role of Luca in Eastern Europe, who was an old woman who would come around and make sure that all the children were behaving around the same time of year. And what else? Oh, the whole Christkind thing, the Christ child, where where it's a girl playing the role of the Christ child who's a boy, but she's dressed totally like a girl. And
right.
And yeah, so that was a lot of fun.
In 2019, you wrote The Lore of Old Elfland, Secrets from the Bronze Age to Middle-earth. How did this book begin for you? I know we talked a little bit about your love of Lord of the Rings and elves, but when did you start studying the folklore of this topic?
I've always been into elves. When I was writing the Christmas book, but my favorite chapter to write was the one about the elves, and the one with the folk tale of the princess and the mound. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun just to write a book just about elves? And maybe people would think of me not just twice a year, Walpurgis Night and Christmas, because this would be for the whole year, elves all around the year. In fact, the original concept was, I think I called it a handbook of the elven year. I never get to keep my working titles. I think Lights in the Forest, a handbook of the elven year. That was the working title. But my editor said, no, we don't want it to do it like I think I always try to write books like a calendar because I think it'll be easier. And then my editor says, no, group it thematically. But Elfland it's got a Christmas chapter. It's got sort of a Halloween chapter because we deal with Alpha Bloat, which happens in October. The elves really took off. And that was a very personal book for me because I share the book about, reading The Hobbit in Germany, a lot of it sitting inside an old wardrobe. And just because of my relationship with the landscape of Northern Germany. And so I share some stories from that part of the world. And the book did very poorly. I don't know if people were not interested in the personal details of me, or it was not a Southern Scandinavia, Northern Germany is maybe not, it's not on people's radar, that part of the world. In fact, I've have people tell me that I can't possibly be going to the beach when I go to Germany because Germany doesn't have a coastline. I'm like, yeah, they do. And ships are a big thing. So that book, that's my favorite book that I've written. That's the one that I've been most proud of. And it sank like a stone. It's already out of print.
I've heard about that with writers, and I was having this conversation with a writer the other day, and it's so much a game of chance, I think, with books. You really, like, one year you publish something, and if you just publish it 5-10 years later, it's suddenly a top 10 bestseller. And it's rhyme or reason. It's the tide of people's interest, or just how the market works, or how the booksellers push the books. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it?
And sometimes you just don't know. Like Johnny Geller, who's a famous literary agent, he said sometimes, the book, the agent loves it, the editor loves it, they put it out there, and just no one touches it, and you don't know why. You just don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like how many authors have you heard of that, throughout their entire life they're impoverished, and then they die and their books become famous 3 years later, and it's like that must
Thanks a lot.
yeah,
Right?
yeah. Thanks a lot, Johnny come latelys, really could have used you a few years earlier.
Yeah, could you have bought it a little sooner?
Now, I was talking off mic about how much I love your research and how well researched these books are. Did you learn anything interesting in your research for this book? I mean, it must have been fantastic pouring through different things and doing research on elves.
Oh yeah, yeah. I always learned something. It was fun writing the herb chapter. I tried to put a herbal chapter in. I don't know if I try. It just kind of happens that there's an herbal chapter in all of my books, and just the stories. What I loved about the stories in this one, like I make a distinction in the introduction, the difference between fairy tales and folk tales. And fairy tales are usually it's in another realm. It's a king and a queen, and stuff that didn't never actually happened, because it's so out there. It doesn't ground it in space or time. And folk tales are so specific. Even the titles, I can't think of any. I'm trying to think of, there's like one about whistling, and the girl from so and so tricked the troll from such and such a place, and so specific. And it usually places it, this was in my grandmother's time, or they still speak of this. And yet the stuff that's happening is so crazy that you're wondering, well, did this actually happen? They're just so quirky and so specific, and so like things that happen, like a bride being abducted on her wedding night. That's a big motif, getting abducted by the elves. And then in one, she's abducted. She I think it's from Norway, this one. She's told, she knows the fairies are going to abduct her because she stole one of their cows.
Right.
And she figures as long as she doesn't go outside during her wedding day, she'll be okay. But this is like 18th century Norway. And finally, she's got to go to the bathroom. So she leaves the house, she's abducted. And then a little time later, a goat brings back the wedding crown, spreads a napkin on the step of the house, places the wedding crown on it, and leaves. So you're just like, what is that about? And I just love it. Yeah, they're so quirky, they're so strange. I just love them.
Now, I know that I've talked with many people who are Tolkien fans, and they talk about elves extensively, maybe exhaustively. I know that Tolkien, he created this whole universe that's his, and it must overlap with mythology somewhat. Have you ever had people that talk to you about the book that maybe confuse the two, or do you talk about that in your book?
There is much confusion with the elves. I know that this confuses me. I think there's people who follow a religion based on Tolkien's elves.
Oh dear God, really?
Which I don't understand, because I'm like, he made that up.
Yeah.
But hey,
I mean,
to
fair
each his
play to you
own.
if you like. Yeah, if you like to do that, I'm not knocking it. I'm a pagan.
Yeah, and it doesn't knock my enjoyment of Tolkien. And there's a lot of worse things that people could be doing with their lives. So, and then one time I was doing a podcast, and the host, there goes my earbud. The host asked me, "Do you think that we will ever find like the remains of elves who died in the flood?" And I was tempted to say, "Did you read the book? It's about folklore."
Yeah.
And I said, "No, I don't think we will." So yeah, I think elves are, I mean, it could be that my book didn't do very well because I said in it that I didn't believe in elves. I
Oh
said
yeah.
that, I love the elves. I was fascinated by the elves, and it's not important for me to believe that they actually exist. So maybe they could have scuttled the book. I don't know. But what does Tolkien say? Something, just because something's not real doesn't mean it's not true. And I
Yeah.
think elves are true.
Yeah.
They are extensions of our imagination. I think they're often our perceptions of the dead. I think many of them were originally ancestors and came from ancestor worship. And yeah, I think what's as interesting is even more interesting than elves actually existing is questioning why do we believe in them, and what do they do for us? And it was interesting in reading the British, not so much the continental, but the British fairy stories. They have a lot in common with alien abduction stories.
Yes.
Yeah. So some people might say, oh, well, fairies are actually aliens, but I'm more inclined to believe aliens are fulfilling a psychological role now that fairies used to fill in the old days.
I like that. Very good. So Christmas again. I want to talk to you about the secret
Christmas
history of
again.
Christmas baking. Recipes and stories for Tomb Offerings to Gingerbread Boys will be out. Now, I really love this book, and I was surprised when you said that you're not a really big baker, because I've really found the book to have some really amazing insights into baking, and especially European baking. I was also really captivated as to I really love the detail that you put in here, that I think oftentimes we get little pithy glimpses into European baking, especially around Christmas in most cookbooks. Like if you read the King Arthur Flour, book that'll have, mentions of baking, but they don't really talk more. So if you want to know more, you need something like your book, because you really do explain it and go into it in depth. And you have a lot of great artwork and illustrations in here that really were very well done. And I really have to applaud the art department for doing a just amazing job on this book. Do you want to talk about this book a little bit and how you were inspired to write it, and what the research was like for you? Because I really was impressed by the extensive research you did for this.
Well, I said I wasn't a baking geek, but you mentioned King Arthur and King Arthur Flour. And when the King Arthur Flour catalog comes in, I sit and I page through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, with much interest. Yeah, I love King Arthur Flour. The King Arthur, most of the recipes are made. This is not a paid promotion, but most of the recipes were made with King Arthur Flour.
Well, it's good stuff.
I love their logo too. They have the beautiful logo with
Yes.
the wheat stalks that are the crown. Yeah. So, where were we? Research or baking?
Either or. I mean, how did you come to do this, and
Or
what was the process like, and how long? When did you conceive of this, and how long did it take to write? Because I mean, it's no flimsy pamphlet here. It's a comprehensive work,
oh, thank you.
and the writing
I like that.
is I thought very well thought out. The chapters were great. And just looking through it, I really loved, again, the art direction, which I think is so lacking in so many cookbooks. You just usually, here you go, recipe, that's it, and it's like something your
Yeah.
grandmother wrote on the back of an envelope, and you're like, I needed more. More would be nice, and your book gives it. So thank you.
Well, yes. Well, those recipes on the backs of envelopes are precious. Hold on to them if you have
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And I reference because a lot of them I was using my mother. My mother, fortunately, is still alive. She's 85, so she was a big source of information. Not always a reliable source, because she would say, something about a recipe, and then I look at, well, you have allspice in that. Did you know you have allspice? Did I put allspice in that? Yes, it says allspice right there, where you wrote down 35 years ago. Well, my first, so Night of the Witches, I'm a baker. I'm a cookbook writer in the long tradition of women cookbook writers, starting maybe all the way with Hannah Glass, in that I don't have a degree. There's not a lot I know how to do. I've raised 2 kids as a single mom, and baking is something that we always did at home. It's something I know how to do. It's something that I can write about and make a little bit of money. And that's for I mentioned Hannah Glass, Melinda Russell. That's been what's her, the one who wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb, Sarah Josepha Hale, also cookbook writer, trying to support your family. So there were actually, it looks like a long time between my first Christmas book coming out in 2013 and Lore of Old Elfland coming out in 2019, but I had actually almost finished one book that Llewellyn event said, no, we don't want it. And then a whole other book, Llewellyn said, no, we don't want it, because they did not have crafts and recipes in it. Had I known when I wrote my first book that every other book after it would have to have crafts and recipes in it, I might not have done it. So with this one, I thought, okay, I'll just go with it and make it mostly recipes. If that's what people want, that's why I can do a recipe. And I do like to bake. I think because of the book still, even though I submitted did the final copy, the final draft about a year ago, I'm still a little bit burnt out, because when you compose a recipe, there were some that I said, this is my mom's recipe. Okay, there it is. But when it was things like the different kinds of gingerbreads that I had never actually made before, I can't just go online and find a recipe for the Polish gingerbread pierniczki and then publish that, because that's somebody else's recipe. So I would be looking at 3, 4, and 5 different recipes. What did I like about them? What did I want to change to make it my own? And then sometimes when I did change, sometimes I changed too many things to make it my own, and I made it and it wasn't good. So then you have to go back to the drawing board, make it again. You have to write down the measurements. I'm more of a seat of the pants cook.
Yeah.
But with this, you've got to write everything down, because you've got to then put that, other people will be able to make it. So yeah, but I think for me, maybe when I can get to the point, I'm really looking forward to this Christmas season, just baking, not for fun, just going wild and putting green tea in things, and not having to do the traditional thing. I think, because the library where I work, they were the guinea pigs for a lot of the recipes, because you know how the staff room table, usually anything you put on the staff room table, people will eat.
Yeah.
But we have, it's sort of the American palate reigns in our staff room. If you give them a brownie or a cupcake, they're very happy, but they see this, like when I brought in Elisen Lebkuchen, they see this thing that they've never seen before, and they were highly suspicious of it.
Yeah, I know that
although
feeling.
I was praised for my Egyptian tiger nut cakes. Somebody was
nice.
brave enough to try an Egyptian tiger nut cake, and she liked it.
Nice. Now in the intro, you talk about a friend had commented, oh, that sounds really light. And you said, no, it can be really dark. The topic of writing about Christmas baking. Can you talk about that a little bit? I really like that bit.
Yeah, I was thinking it would be medieval. I thought the book would be much more straightforward, the research, than it was. I should have learned, because this is my fourth book, and the research is never as straightforward as you think it's going to be. So yeah, there is a danger, I think, of people might read this book and think, I'm never going to bake a Christmas cookie again, because it is dark. There is blood in these recipes. I hope people will still bake, but I want them to, like my editor said, one of the editors, I think the copy editor said, I will think about that little boy in on the island of Réunion, a little enslaved boy who revolutionized the way we pollinate vanilla flowers. She said she'll think of him whenever she adds vanilla to something in her kitchen. So to people to know these very complex stories. I don't know. I mean, you learn in elementary school, you know, oh, they went to look for the Spice Islands because they wanted the spices, and then they got the spices. But no, there's a lot going on there. There was enslavement and slaughter and highly unethical business practices going on to get these spices from the places where they grew into our cabinets. Oh, and they also will tell you, we learned in school how the Europeans wanted spices because they needed it to take away the taste of the rotten meat, which is totally false. Like the Europeans they've been eating meat for thousands and thousands of years. They knew how to preserve meat.
Yeah.
They went after the spices because they liked the way they tasted, and it was something special and it was something exotic.
There were a lot of good bits I liked in this. I love the throw the devil a bone portion of the book. Can you talk about that? And am I pronouncing it right? Duvicator?
I think so. I speak Plattdeutsch, which is close to Dutch, but I don't actually speak Dutch. So yeah, I would say Duvicator, maybe, which is the devil's cat. And that the research into that one kind of sort of answered a question that had arisen in my mind when I was researching Lucia buns for Old Magic of Christmas. I came across some little note about people eating cat buns on St. Nicholas Day, but I couldn't find any more. And I remembered there was a historical author, Dorothy Dunnett, who wrote a series of books called The House of Niccolo, about a Flemish, an upstart, illegitimate son, Flemish merchant it takes place in the 15th century and follows him from Flanders through the Mediterranean. I think he ends up like doing the salt trade in Africa. It's exciting, adventurous, a lot of historical detail. And there's one part I remembered where he went to an island that was dedicated. There was a shrine to St. Nicholas, and there were feral cats everywhere, and
Oh, wow.
hadn't really thought about that. And then researching the Duivenkater, or the Duivenkater, I found the shrine in the Mediterranean. There is a shrine to St. Nicholas with lots of feral cats, and read the chapter, but there seems to be a connection between St. Nicholas, cats, Lucia buns, and the solstice. We just don't know kind of like which direction the influences were flowing. Were they flowing north to south, or were they flowing south to north?
Now, there was a portion I really liked. I've always been captivated by the Italian story of La Befana, and you talk about her a little bit in this book. Can you talk about that a little bit for our audience?
Well, that I was lucky because when I was working at the Berkeley Heights Library in New Jersey, I think after I'd submitted the Old Magic of Christmas manuscript maybe already, and the reference librarian mentioned how she had played the role of La Befana when she was in school. I know, could you not have told me that sooner? So this time I made a date and I went to her house and I interviewed her about her experience playing La Befana, who was an Italian witch she was an old lady, and the three wise men came by and asked her directions to Bethlehem. And she said, don't bother me. I am cleaning my house. So they walked on, and then she thought, oh, they mentioned they were going to go visit some special baby. I should have gone with them. I'm going to forget the house. I'm going to go with them. She baked some cookies and she hurried after them, but of course she never found them. They had moved on down the road. And so she flies around still looking for the Christ child, and she drops presents down the chimney just in case baby Jesus might be in that house. So yeah, and she differs, from different parts of Italy, and yeah, so you can read my friend Anne, the librarian's story about her own personal experience playing the role of Bafana.
You have a recipe for something I like, but I don't think many other people have heard of or eaten much of it, and that's black cake. What was your experience with the baking of it, and did you like it?
Oh gosh, okay, that was intense. I had never heard of it until a couple years ago. I was at a barbecue at my friend's house, and one of the other guests he was originally from Trinidad, and I think I said somehow cake came out. Like probably brought a cake. Cake came up, and he mentioned black cake and how his aunt used to make, or his godmother used to make black cake. And I said, "What's that? I've never heard of that." And he said, "You have never heard of that?" And I hadn't. So he told me it's made with molasses and fruit, and so that was he told some entertaining stories about it. About it's soaked in rum. So he told a story about him eating it as a child when he wasn't supposed to. And so I filed that away. And when I decided to write the Christmas book, I asked my friend Betty to get me in touch with him. And so I talked to him on the phone, and yeah, he still sends me, his name is Wayne, and he still sends me regularly music videos from Trinidad, from the traditional bands who play in Trinidad. So he's getting a copy when the book comes out. So he gave me a lot of pointers on making the cake. One pointer that I forgot when I was making it was then you need to you heat brown sugar.
Yeah.
That's what makes the cake black, is the cooked brown sugar. And he said, when you add the water to the hot brown sugar, add it slowly. And I forgot that. Now I know why slow, because it will go up like a volcano. And I sent him a picture of the stove. I texted him a picture of the stove after that had happened. I told you to add it slowly. Yeah.
There's
but yeah,
all
black
kinds of
cake is throughout in a lot of places in the Caribbean, black cake is the Christmas cake. It's also, they have it at Easter, they have it at weddings, when you put cover it in marzipan and then a hard white queens, like what are they, royal frosting on top of it. But yeah, that's pretty much the centerpiece of the Caribbean Christmas dinner.
Yeah, it's a lot like old school British Christmas cake that you used to see. I don't think they really do much of that anymore, though.
It's similar to like a Victorian Christmas fruit cake.
Yeah.
And then yet it's different. And then again, it's different because everybody puts their own spin on things.
Yeah, I remember in All Creatures Great and Small, James would go to house, and every one of his clients would give him a slice of Christmas cake, and it was soaked in
Yes.
alcohol, and he was schnockered by the end of his.
And I remember the one, at least on the BBC version, the one housewife, she would sit there and watch him,
Yeah.
like, how is it? And he was, oh, it's the best ever.
I love that. I haven't made it in a while, but I used to make the Scottish black bun, and it was basically the same thing, but it is encased in a inedible flour and water pastry, and you basically cook it, and then you make a little hole in the top and pull out kind of a plug, and then you will top up the alcohol. You'll pour some whiskey in every few days or so, and then you'll put the plug back, cover it in cheesecloth, or take a few days later, do the same thing, and you do that for months. You do that in October, and by the time Christmas rolls around, it's basically solidified alcohol.
Yeah. With black cake, you can do that too. You can eat it right away, or you can just keep dousing it for potentially forever. And also the fruits for the black cake, you soak them in rum, or there's other alcohol you can use. You can do whiskey, you can do port. So you soak that I was a little nervous because I have these fruits I had these throughout the summer, soaking in rum, and every morning I would get up and stir them because Wayne said get up, stir them regularly. And in one article I read, a woman who was new to making black cake, I think she was Jamaican, and she mentioned to her brother-in-law in maybe July, I've started soaking the fruit for the black cake for Christmas. And he said, great, it'll be ready for Christmas next year. Yeah.
Wow. I grew up with fruitcake. I like it. Like my grandmother from Texas would make it with lots of pecans, and my grandmother from Arkansas would make it with lots of walnuts. I don't know what the dichotomy was there, but I like it. A lot of people complain about it, but I've always liked it. Do you like it?
Fruitcake?
Yeah.
Especially. Not especially, although to get into it again. It's not my favorite. But you mentioned pecans, and I mentioned in my glossary that nobody can agree how to pronounce it. I think the
Yeah.
dichotomy is walnut is old world and pecan is a new world nut.
Yeah.
So especially from the South, you're going to have pecans. And my daughter recently moved to Las Cruces, and she says there it's a big industry there, but they say it pecan. So that's a third pronunciation.
How do you think the traditions for Christmas baking have evolved over time? What do you think the changes have been, or the ones that you've noticed?
Well, the biggest change was these things becoming Christmas foods, because none of them they were all eaten for a long time before they became Christmas foods. Like if I had to say like the most influential place on Christmas baking would probably, I would have to say, would be 11th century Baghdad.
Yeah.
That's probably where marzipan was invented. That's where candy making reached a height. They were using spices. It was really a cosmopolitan place to be. And so when it was the Arabs who brought marzipan or marzipan for English speakers, there is an English word for marzipan, which is marchpane, but nobody uses it. So marzipan was brought, came probably through Alexandria into Europe. Sugar also was introduced by the Arabs into Europe. The spices came from anywhere from Southeast Asia, India, ginger and pepper coming from India, usually originally through the port of Alexandria in Egypt. The Jews had a lot of the traditions, like challah was not always what we think of, the braided loaf today. It went through several different shapes, and that duvekate, the bone-shaped pastry, may have something to do with challah, because I think they weren't really baking with yeast. By the time there was the first Jewish colony in Cologne in Germany, the Germans were still baking, sort of flat, not so leavened breads.
Yeah.
So that was a big influence, and it was probably Jewish traders who first introduced gingerbread, what became Lebkuchen in Germany and gingerbread in England. And gingerbread was holiday food and wedding food in Jewish families through the Middle Ages. So it's the biggest evolution was these foods becoming not just Christmas foods, but Christian foods.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I want to say, because it's Christmas, so there must be a lot of religious and cultural influences on Christmas baking. What did some of the things that you saw that were the most surprising in your research regarding the religious influence on holiday baking?
I was surprised about the Stollen. The Stollen is a German Christmas cake / bread. There's a baking soda version. There's a yeast version, which was one I never really liked it growing up. It was something we ate it because it was Christmas. That was Christmas breakfast was when we would first slice into the Stollen. And it was just, even though I didn't like it, I had to eat it because it was Christmas morning, and I felt like Christmas morning would not be complete unless you have some Stollen. But now I really love it. And it was, there was a whole thing in Saxony, the Principality of Saxony, sometime in the Middle Ages. It's in the book. where the Elector of Saxony was petitioning the Pope to be allowed that the bakers could put butter in the stone, even though they were baking during Advent. And Advent in the Middle Ages was a Lenten season. It was a season of fasting. So they weren't supposed to be using butter. So their only other choices were to use olive oil, which by the time it got to Saxony, it was rancid, or to use rapeseed oil, which was something that they, at that time, rapeseed oil is the same as canola oil, but it's a different species. It's been genetically engineered. So canola oil tastes pretty good. The rapeseed oil in those days did not taste good, and you would just use it to put in your oil lamp. So it was not good tasting Stollen in those days. And they finally got permission from the Pope. So this is pre-Martin Luther, to use butter in the Stollen, and that is when it took off.
What's your favorite thing to bake? What's the thing that you really anticipate making each year as it gets closer to Christmas?
This year, I'm really looking forward to making Lebkuchen again, because I feel like during the writing of this book, my Lebkuchen skills really, I make some good Lebkuchen, it's okay. On the package, if you buy it, it's translated as gingerbread. My mother is of the school that there should not be any ginger in Lebkuchen. The sort of the headquarters of Lebkuchen baking is in Nuremberg, Germany, and they say there are 5 spices, but they don't tell you what the 5th one is. I think the 5th is probably ginger. Not necessarily. So I've gotten really good at making the candied orange and lemon peel that goes into it. Because if you make it too tough, it won't be good. If you make it too soft, it'll be mushy. So that, to me, because it has all the flavors, it's got the lemon, the orange, the spices, the marzipan. I'm now proud to say I can make my own marzipan, apricot jam. And so it's just a balance of flavors, and you make it early, you put it aside so it coalesces. And then a lot of these cookies are, you take a bite, you're chewing it. Now, when you have like a sugar cookie, you bite into it, it tastes a certain way, you keep chewing it, it still tastes that way. With these recipes, they've got so much going on in them. You take a bite, it tastes one way. You keep chewing, oh, now I taste the molasses. Now I taste the almond. And it's like it's an experience.
So, my last question, what is next for you?
What is next for me? Oh, so glad you asked. I like to take a break between nonfiction. I think it's most nonfiction. Many nonfiction writers dream to write a novel. I've written a couple novels, none of them have been published. So I am, my manuscript is out to my beta readers right now for a science fiction novel.
Ooh.
And I am planning to go rogue with this one.
Nice.
It's to get traditionally published, you need to write a story that tens of thousands of people want to read. And with my nonfiction books, I think thousands of people have enjoyed it, and I'm very happy with that. So I think with this, I think maybe hundreds of people will like to read my novel. It seems kind of out of left field, but my main character is a university student on another planet, and her major is Old Earth feasts and festivals.
Nice.
So that's the tie-in. That's my bridge from nonfiction to fiction.
I like that. I'm looking forward to that then. That sounds great.
I'm glad to hear it.
Linda, I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to you. I hope we can have you on here again sometime.
I'd love to come back. Thanks so much.
That was my conversation with author Linda Raedisch. You can pre-order her book, The Old Magic of Christmas, by going to the link in the bio. Next week, we'll be speaking with author Crystal Blanton. She is the author of such books as Bringing Race to the Table, as well as Shades of Faith and Shades of Ritual. We'll be speaking to her next week. Until then, I hope you have a blessed week.